Alrighty, welcome back to the channel. In this video we're carrying out a little bit of maintenance on the Forester. We've got some fresh sway bar links to go in and sway bar bushes. Up front we've got some sway bar links that have been in the vehicle for over 100,000 kilometers and currently have split boots on them, so the grease is escaping, so they're well overdue for replacement. And the rear sway bar bushes are actually the original factory ones that have done over 200,000 kilometers, so they're also well and truly due for replacement. So stick around if you want to see how I did the job. It's very basic, nice little easy job to do at home. Anyway, let's get into it. Starting with the removal of the sway bar end links up the front, we're removing the lower control arm fixing point first. So removing that nut holding it to the control arm, and that way you're getting the most accessible point done out of the way first. Then once you've done both sides, you can actually rotate the sway bar down and get the upper attachment points more accessible. And one thing to note when you're removing sway bar links, you can see here they are coming out nice and easily from their fixing point. If you have the vehicle on nice level ground, there'll be no pressure on the sway bar. If you park it on uneven surface or jack up one side of the vehicle, something like that, you'll put pressure on the sway bar and that will make it a lot harder to remove. Now, an easy way to get these done is using a ring spanner over the nut, and then you can put a ratchet with an Allen key socket onto it, and that way you can ratchet either the spanner or the Allen key socket and you can get the job done nice and easily. Now, this is the first little issue I ran into with removing these sway bar links. They've been on the vehicle for over 5 years. So they've built up a lot of grime and grit on the threads, possibly a bit of rust. So usually I'd use something like WD-40, a little bit of penetrant spray to help clean the threads and lubricate the nut when you're removing it. However, I got a bit lazy and didn't do that, so I ended up binding up the threads and getting the nut stuck and rounding out the Allen key hardware. So don't be like me, don't be lazy, use a bit of WD-40 or something similar, and that way you won't have to use an angle grinder to cut this bit of hardware off. After that little hiccup, I ended up using some WD-40 on the next one, and that made the job a lot easier. Everything went very smoothly from there on out. Okay, so these KLC 144 end links from Whiteline, they are the same ones that I had on the vehicle previously, and they are well suited to my particular setup because I'm running a 2-inch lift. These will probably not work very well for a standard vehicle or lowered vehicle, but if you're running a 2-inch lift, these seem to work quite well. So I've gone with them again. Now these are adjustable, so when you set them up, you want the ends to face opposite directions. And another thing to take note of is to get the hardware centered on the adjustment section. So I basically screwed it in as far as it would go and faced the ends opposite directions and rotated the center adjustment one whole rotation and then tightened the lock nuts to meet at that point. And that seemed to work quite well. Then just locked everything in firmly with the adjusting hardware and got them ready to install. To get the adjustments spot on when you're locking them down, it did take a couple of goes. Basically, you have to sort of preemptively adjust them, so when you tighten them down, they end up facing the opposite directions and they are running nice and parallel. I didn't want them to be off on an angle because that would put extra pressure on the rubber boots when they're installed on the vehicle. So with the surfaces nice and level, opposite directions, they were ready to install. When installing these, I probably tightened them up a little firmer than necessary. However, on the previous ones, they did come loose a couple of times after the initial installation, but once I retightened them a couple of times, I didn't have an issue for the rest of their life on the vehicle. So with these ones, I thought I'd just try and tighten them nice and firmly from the beginning, and I hope that they won't need adjusting again. And did the same old trick with the installation, reversing the process, starting with the ends attached to the sway bar so that I can rotate that up and out of the way, keeping everything as accessible as possible to make my job that little bit easier. That job is done and dusted with the sway bar links. Now, just centering it here so that there is even pressure on the rubber boots. That way it gives it the best chance to last a long time without the boots tearing. Now, just gonna spin the car around, set it back up on the ramps and get into the rear sway bar bushes. Okay, so wrapping this little maintenance session up with these rubber bushings for the rear sway bar. That's the part number there. That's the genuine part from Subaru. You'll see there's a little bit of play with these old ones. They've done over 200,000 kilometers. As I mentioned, they are the original bushes on the vehicle. So good to finally get around to replacing these. There's not too much play on this side. However, you'll see in a minute on the opposite side, there is a bit more play. And these have probably been needing to be replaced for quite some time. So good to finally get around to doing this job. And it's quite an easy one at that. All you have to do is take these two bolts out, then this bracket comes off very easily, and once more, reverse that process. So the new one goes on, pop that bracket back on, and bolt it back into place. With this last bolt tightened down, that'll wrap up this little maintenance mission. Very satisfying to get these jobs done. Now you'll see the sway bars nice and firm in place now, a little bit of wriggle room with the compliance of the bushings, but no room for slop. And it's very satisfying to get these jobs done at home. I've got this great little Kidchrome toolkit. I've had this for years and it covers all the bases to get all the basic jobs like this done at home. There's a few extra ones that I have on the side for more complicated jobs, but for carrying around in the car and getting all your general maintenance done, this thing covers pretty much everything, which is fantastic to have on board. With these sway bar links removed from the vehicle, it's much easier to inspect them properly, and these bushes are obviously split quite badly at both ends. However, they've held up quite well. The fluid movement in both ends still very smooth, no real slop there, and nice and loose, moving how they should be. This end's a little stiffer, but it still moves nice and smoothly, and there's no real slop in that end either. So they actually held up quite well with the split boots and the grease escaping and the grit getting in there. I was quite surprised that they weren't worse than they were. Anyway, nice to get the fresh ones in. With these sway bar bushes, they'd obviously hardened and shrunk a little bit over time, creating that little bit of movement in the rear sway bar. So it was great to get those fresh ones put in there and get that problem sorted. But with that done and dusted, everything's wrapping up now for this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider giving it a thumbs up. That really helps push the video to more people. And if you want to support the channel, please consider subscribing. That really helps the channel grow. Thank you guys very much for checking it all out, and see you in the next one. Cheers.